And we are recording. All right. Hey, everybody. Kelsey here. I'm joined today by Joseph, who is one of our Rockstar clients. He has graciously agreed to come on today to share his story that I know will resonate with a lot of you, parents, and a lot of your kids also, who might be going through some challenges in high school and university. So we're very lucky with Joseph today because he's going to share about both, and the perspective that he has definitely speak to a lot of the challenges and the solutions in overcoming those challenges that we see with a lot of our learners. So Joseph, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Kelsey. Great to talk to you.
Wonderful. So Joseph, I'm essentially going to put you in the driver's seat here, just on the hot spot, but why don't we start out with high school, and what were some of the main challenges that you experienced going to high school? And just for context, if it matters, but all boys school, private school, pretty rigorous academics. Tell us a bit about some of the more difficult challenges that you faced.
So I would say in terms of lecturing, everything was normal and understanding the material in that regard. But I think when it came to certain assignments, sometimes understanding how to piece them together to put together an effective product, there were some challenges. I remember particularly in grade 11 in English, we were doing a Shakespearean unit. And while I understood the material, when I would write essays, I wouldn't get great marks on them, and I couldn't really understand why. I would see comments, but I wasn't getting the results I wanted in that regard. And then I realized that probably my essays were not as strong as they should be, even though I understood what was going on.
That's huge. And that's actually, I hope that you can speak a bit more to that, because that, like, putting in the work and feeling like you understand it, but then not getting that grade to reflect how you're feeling about it. For you in the end, realizing, okay, well, clearly the essays aren't as strong as I think. What was the disconnect there? Or were there multiple disconnects?
I think it was putting even something as simple as thesis statements. I understood it in my mind, but not making it clear. And that's something obviously we've worked on a lot. And that's the number one thing I think for an essay at both the high school and university level. If a professor or a teaching assistant doesn't understand what you're arguing, you're not going to get the results you're looking for. So I think that was the number one issue. And I think also even smaller things like quote integration and like analysis of quotes, I would just put quotes in and not necessarily explain it, how they pertained back to the thesis statement, relating it to that. And so there was a bit of disconnect, and that even continued over into history classes where they would introduce essays. And while there was no essays in grade 9 and 10 history classes, in grade 11 and 12 there were. And I think maybe you weren't exactly prepared. And I think even talking to other students at other schools in history classes, they kind of, some of them, they don't even have essays. And I think that's important though, that they do, especially getting ready for university.
Yeah, definitely. And so for you, kind of leading up to grade 10, 11, were you thinking of history, English, those subjects as very separate? And when those essays came together, did you start to see kind of these skills being applied in both subjects? Or did it seem like history requires this particular skill set, English requires this particular skill set? Could you?
I think there's some difference, but I think the overall product that they're looking for, because especially in high school, I know they use that kind of KICA system for mostly for quantitative, but they also were using it for these qualitative subjects were in English and history. So I think as long as you really understood what they were trying to look for, and they want an argument and they want the support, it can be applied in both disciplines.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, Kika, just for people watching.
Right. Let me see if I can. Knowledge, inquiry, communication is one, and application. I think that's.
You do, yeah. Good on you.
I do remember.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, so a couple of these gaps, as far as, strong thesis, quote integration, like these are really foundational principles of strong academic writing. So when you started to focus your attention, energy on kind of mastering those pieces, first of all, how long was that kind of process from not understanding why aren't I getting the grades I think I'm capable of, to that aha moment of applying these principles more explicitly into your writing and seeing the grades go up?
I think it was, so we started working with Como Consulting, I guess, in grade 12. And I think it was the big paper that was due that year in February where it really came together. It was something that we'd been working on for quite a while on The Handmaid's Tale. And I think just going through that process and I was also going to my teacher at that time back and forth to check in. And I think that's when it really clued in, because it was we started basically from nothing on that project, and even having to understand the material and moving forward. And that's really when I saw what a substantial essay would actually result in and look like.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I want to emphasize that because we talk a lot about, for students to not just know like intellectually what a strong essay needs to be like, but to feel that difference of what you did differently or how you thought differently to produce something that's truly high quality. And for you, just can I ask, what was the best part of that feeling? Like seeing that and handing it in, and
it almost seemed like something that was written by maybe a journalist or something like that, because you could just see. I remember even reading the essay I'd written the year before, and I just realized, I think that's even important for students. Look back and then you see the changes that you've made, and it kind of reinforces what the key qualities of strong writing is at any level, whether you're in high school or university.
I love that reflection piece. And that's a big part of metacognition too, just like looking back, reflecting on your own thinking and seeing, oh my gosh, like how far I've come. And I want to also highlight what you said about, it's not just, yes, you were getting the strategies, and I have extremely fond memories of working together because that was such a mammoth project. It was worth so much. The stakes were high, but the fact that you leaned right in, you took the strategies, you started applying them, and you were so resourceful. Like you self-advocated, you went to the teacher, like all of those ingredients really came together for what was a really positive outcome for sure. Okay, so that's okay. So let's zoom out a little bit here. So we've got the essay writing piece and going from why aren't I getting the grades I need to, okay, now I get it. Were there any other kind of big challenges that you faced in high school, that you think any of our students who are currently in high school could also be going through?
I think beyond the essay writing, it's important to be analytical with whatever type of material you're learning about. Sometimes I would just take it at face value, and then when the assignment came, I would realize there's some deeper thinking to be done. So I think even when there's lecture content at the high school level with whatever it is, even if you understand it, think deeper and ask difficult questions about it. Sometimes you'll be prompted by the teacher, but if not, try and understand really why you're learning about that, because that is so important for university, where it's not going to be regurgitation of information, but a lot of analytical components.
Oh my gosh, that's huge. That's so huge. And let me ask you this, for you, did it come, like, how do you do that essentially for subjects that you're not necessarily inspired by? Because what you've outlined is absolutely essential, 100% nail on the head. How do you kind of keep that curiosity or that deeper engagement with classes that you'd maybe rather not be taking in high school?
I think even relating it to English, because Shakespeare or different things, even I remember reading about Oedipus Rex, it was not, I guess, the most interesting personally. And I think the way I dealt with those challenges were trying to understand why this is an important piece of writing, almost in history. Why are we learning about it? What analytical skills can I understand from this, or how is this going to improve myself as an academic? I think because there's a reason you're reading everything in high school or university. They're not picking readings just for the sake of them. They're to improve you as a student.
Yeah.
And look at it as part of the journey, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, Joseph. That's so, that's super insightful, unsurprisingly, of course, but that's really important. It's almost like challenging yourself to stay curious, challenging yourself to see the value for you, right? Regardless of what you actually have to do externally, but for you as like a thinker and a learner and a writer and whatever. That's awesome. Okay. And so outside of those two things, is there anything else that, looking back on high school, that you wish that you'd done or known or thought of?
Outside of those, not too much. I think the essay writing was really the biggest thing. And I think I look back as just how much it connects to university. Even today, you'll do essay writing in every class, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you will. And even for, a lot of students, if they're thinking, I don't like writing, so I'm not going to pursue a degree that's super heavy with writing. But it's, the quality of our writing really reflects our thinking. So regardless of what discipline you're pursuing, like if there's any writing whatsoever, regardless at any level, including like labs, that's all just a measure of, are you thinking critically? Are you thinking clearly? That comes out in writing. So writing really, it's a skill no matter what discipline.
Right. Like I've taken economics classes where we've had to write op-eds or reports, and it's just as important there to get across what information is in your graphs onto the paper, and that was a component of it, analysis in writing. And if you didn't do well in that section, the paper as a whole would suffer.
Yeah. So, okay, let's just drill down to that again, really precisely. Like if you had to pick 1 to 3 things, what were the most important things you did to equip yourself with that skill, to be able to have that analytic thinking, feel comfortable with what that means and looks like, applying it to your subjects, and having that writing, like you said, whether it was econ or an IR or whatever? Like what were the most important things that helped you develop that confidence and that capability?
I think it was, first of all, planning it out properly, because I think you can become overwhelmed with, you have to write a 10 to 12 page paper and people want to get it down. First, you have to, I think, I always make my notes first and let me get a grasp of content, and then produce an outline. And the outline, I try to make it as seamless as possible. And that's what we've worked on. I was
going to say this is music to my ears, but yes.
Yeah. Introduction with a thesis, then topic sentences. And that's something you're taught before, but if you don't actually plan it out properly with this analysis, the paper will suffer, because you're not exactly sure the direction it's going. And I've seen that in the past. Even sometimes I'll do an outline, maybe it's not the best one, and then I'll try and write a draft. The draft is not cohesive and it's not where it has to be, and then you have to go back, and that's the number one thing.
Yeah, and that's such a waste of time and so frustrating too. But that's funny. I love that you said that, because it's so true. Once you see what it looks like when it's done proper, like when your thinking is focused and it's not just that you have an outline that looks okay, that you've put some thought into, but when you've really focused on the individual pieces of information, you're clear on how they all connect. That's, and I was thinking back to a couple of your most recent papers that you shared with me recently, but like, you can see that. It's like, wow, this is a really cohesive, well thought out paper, and it stems from that amazing outline that you put together.
Definitely.
That's awesome. So the outline, okay, that's huge. And then, so let's talk about the transition to college. So you're going to a pretty competitive school, about to graduate soon. Yes. But if we go back to first year, tell us a bit about the transition. And again, kind of just anything, like, did you feel like you were prepared for it? Do you feel like you could have done something different to prepare? And yes, academics for sure, but also the whole transition obviously has a lot of non-academic components. So definitely I invite you to speak to that if you'd like also.
Sure. So I think if we start academically, I think going to class is a normal experience. There's way more people in the class, and that can be overwhelming. But if the lecturers will be, for the most part, proficient in their area, I think it's more working. Number one is also working with TAs and knowing what they want. I find you can write a really good paper sometimes, and maybe not get the mark you want, and because there are certain preferences that they have. So I learned that communication with TA, especially when you have them in tutorial, is really important to run things by them. And I remember one paper I wrote for first year political science, didn't do great. Went to talk to him for the second one and did much, much better. And I feel like if I didn't go speak to him the second time, I wouldn't have seen that result. And I think the other main thing is how to read academic documents is a big thing. At the high school level, you're not really reading academic journals or papers, or if you do, I think it's few and far in between. And these are important for tutorials to discuss, but also when you're writing a paper, you have to be referencing these, whether it's a book or an online journal. And it can be overwhelming for a student. It was for me when I got to university. You're trying to read for details. You don't realize you're just looking for the big argument that the author's making. And I remember going to a few tutorials at the beginning, and not the questions they were asking, I didn't really know how to answer, because I wasn't looking for the main argument there. So I think that's a big component. You're going to be studying the social sciences at university.
And I'll extend that, anything that's going to involve reading in university. Again, even if it's a scientific discipline, the humanities, reading is essentially the key way that information is going to be disseminated, right? Yes, you've got lectures, but at the end of the day, how are you learning what you're meant to be learning in your discipline? A lot of it is through that visual processing, through readings, through graphs, through whatever. So yeah, that's huge. So as far as reading, I want to, no, actually, sorry, those are two pieces of gold right there, I think. So just to go back to the first one, because this is huge. This is also, you guys, this applies to high school. A lot of students in high school, they would not think to email their teachers or whatever for clarification. Like it would be like, I'm going to be annoying, or like nobody does that, it's uncool, whatever. But what Joseph has just shared for university, which is true in spades, it does apply to high school. So we're talking about this in a college context, but just an FYI, it applies at all levels, because it's basically developing relationships, right? Joseph, like, were you, as far as going to your TA, did that come naturally to you off the bat? Was this something that you were nervous about or intimidated by? And if so, how did you overcome that?
I think it depends on the TA. Some are really friendly and that you're just going to automatically feel more comfortable. I had a few who were not tough, that's the wrong word, but it was very business-like with them, and they would come in and there'd be no pleasantries, like you would probably experience from a teacher in high school. And so there was a little bit of an uncomfortable situation to go speak to them. But it's so important, because I think if they understand that everybody cares, I guess, at university, about their education, but if you show an interest, and if they give you guidance and you take their advice, you're bound to do better, because that's what they're looking for exactly. And it's difficult for them to grade a paper and say, oh, this is, and critique it, when a lot of the components are in there, they've told you to put in there yourself.
Yeah, that's huge. So even like in the face of this TA is not the most welcoming or whatever, just going and soliciting their input for your papers, you found to be indispensable.
Definitely. Yeah. If I had to go over, I would go talk to every single TA in first year for papers.
You would do it more.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay. So I think that is really clear and powerful. I was going to ask, like, because we have probably more students than not, and maybe you could speak to this with your own peers and classmates too. But for whatever reason, TAs are just not a resource that so many students just don't take advantage of it. They don't want, it's like they think that it'll make them look stupid, or that they won't understand the material, or, just lots of different reasons. But what would you say to them as far as, using that resource and really the impact it can have, like for students who might be just afraid or intimidated or think it's dumb?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to go to them, because that's what they're there for. They're the ones grading your paper, and you have a right at university to expect to have a conversation with them to foster. It's your academic career, and you don't want to suffer because it's an uncomfortable situation. I think that's even a life skill moving forward. If you're looking for references for grad school, you can't be uncomfortable to go up to a professor. That's even, I think, more intimidating sometimes depending on the professor. But it's just something that even if you were in the work environment and you were unsure what to do, you would have to go to your supervisor to ask for assistance. And it's no different there. It's better almost if you treat it like a job, like they're grading you, so go see what final product they're looking for and what qualities they want for you to have success. It's, at the end of the day, it's your education. I think that's a great way to think about it, because you're there, you're putting in the effort. You don't want to do poorly.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so glad that we're recording this, because I want to snippet that 100%. Yeah. Wow. Okay. That is, that's so insightful. It's so true. And you're absolutely right. What you've just described, it's building out confidence as a way of a lifestyle, as a way of approaching life, regardless of whether it's in school or at a job or whatever, and looking at it as an academic career. It seems like that was a really, I don't want to say a serious platform, but like you said, you're there anyway. if you're there with any inkling of actually learning and doing well and like building out a skill set and figuring out kind of what path you want to go down in life, like why not do it properly, right?
Exactly.
If you're spending the time anyway, why not make it count?
Right. And you want to give yourself every advantage. If somebody else goes to speak and they to the TA and they do better and you don't, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage because other people will go if you don't, or regardless if you go or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, and this is maybe a strange question, but I think it's an important one. Like at the end of the day, everyone is just a person, right? Like your TAs, teachers, like despite this kind of like hierarchical setting that we often have within, post-secondary institutions, everyone is there to help for the same reason, more or less, right? And at the end of the day, it's just a person. And if you make that effort to connect with a person and they see that you're being genuine, more often than not, there's that reciprocity. Did you find that to be true in your experience? Did you ever have a TA be like, get out of here?
No, I mean, like, they're very welcoming. They're students at the end of the day too. They're on a different level, obviously pursuing their PhD, and they have a wealth of knowledge that even if that's something specifically they want for their paper, you can apply it to other classes too, if it's something you think is relevant and it will make your paper stronger. So there's an ability to learn from them and forge different, even a relationship moving forward. One of my friends, he still speaks to a TA that he had in second year for different reasons because his research interests and they both align with each other, and he's applying to grad school, so he wanted a little bit of insight. So there's a lot you can gain even beyond a mark when you go discuss something.
That's huge. And I'd say that goes right back to what you said earlier about that life skill, like developing genuine relationships with people in whether it's academics or in your industry. That can go a very long way in ways that at the time you might not be able to foresee.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
That's awesome. Okay, so the self-advocacy, use the resources, go see the TAs, develop genuine relationships. They're people to students at a different level, like Joseph said. That's awesome. And then the other big piece, which I'm like so thrilled that you brought up, because reading is one of those things, like I always ask our students, like, what's your process for reading? And they always look at me like I have 5 heads, right? Like I sit down and read, like, what are you talking about? Because like reading comprehension strategies, the ability to manage a really voluminous and complex reading load, often isn't something that students really learn or that they even are aware that they should learn. So for you two, can you talk a bit more just about, you mentioned, the focusing on details versus getting the high level. If you could talk a little bit more about that. And then was there anything else as far as the reading goes, if you're identifying, 1 or 2 other kind of key aspects of that bucket of academics that you wish you'd known that you thought was helpful, that made a difference for you?
Sure. So I think with big picture, one strategy that we discussed and helped me is read a page or read a section and see what you understand from it, and just making your own notes from what you remember. Sometimes you'll skim it a second time to get some more information. But if you're just writing after every paragraph, you're not going to remember that information after, even if you go back to it, because it's just too voluminous. It's just too much information to understand. So just reading, and this is what the author was arguing here, and well, this is how he supported a couple examples. If you can regurgitate it, because that's what you're going to have to do in a tutorial or on an exam. So if you're able to do it to yourself in small chunks in a small setting, it'll definitely benefit you when you're being tested on it or have to discuss it with peers. In terms of other strategies, I think it's about also understanding if you're reading something. I've even had this in 4th year and you still don't understand it. Sometimes it's because it's the way it's worded, and they're being very academic, to put it, I guess, simply. And at that point, I would say, even if you don't have tutorials, go discuss it with your professor and say, I'm not really understanding what they're trying to argue here, because it happens a lot of the time. And sometimes profs will even say, oh, this is a difficult reading, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to cover it in lecture. So you still have to, I think, seek that resource and understand it's not always you. It's sometimes it's the type of reading that you're interacting with.
Yeah. And when you just said that, I was thinking of like those sentences that are like 7 lines and have like, 9 like commas or whatever. And you're like, what is going on? Yeah. That's huge. And that also speaks to like, it's not, especially in college, it's not like you can just read something and you've done the reading. Like from everything you've just described, like it is like you've just literally, I think, defined like engagement. Like you really have to understand what is being said, how is it relating, like all of these kind of bigger questions to take what you've read and be able to actually apply it. Like you said, whether it's an essay or a test, which is really different than high school, eh? Like in high school, most students, they'll do a reading, it's done. They won't even take notes.
Yeah, it's easier to process, I guess, in your mind. And I think one thing at university is putting scholars in contact with each other, whether it's for historiography, competing points of view, and that can also help you to tease out different perspectives and arguments once you see they either directly reference each other or you make the connection. And sometimes they'll tell you, it'll even be a question, I'll see how these two authors connect with one another. And that can be even better, but I think that's important for different disciplines, and it helps the connection too.
Absolutely. And that's one of the absolute best entry points when you're talking about, how do you analyze? How do you break something down? Like, how do you actually show quality thinking in these writings? And yeah, taking two scholars. So Joseph, you referenced this. I think some people might have gotten that, but I'm just going to give a little context. Or actually, you know what? No, I'm not going to. You know it. You give some more context. What does it mean to put scholars in conversation with each other?
So I guess I'll give an example to help illustrate it. So if there's different points on maybe who caused a war. Like one of my papers was directly on take a position on who started the Cold War, and one was like there's different schools like revisionist, traditional, post-revisionist, and they argue, for example, one the U.S. started, one the Soviet Union, and one was a little bit of both, which I think would be post-revisionist. And so now let's say scholar A says U.S., scholar B says Soviet Union, and you're comparing different arguments. And the assignment was you have to pick one. You have to pick a side and who had, and that's based on substantial evidence and what you understand. So you're saying A does this, B counters it with this, but A actually has a counter for that counter. So it's really putting their arguments and comparing them. And it's a difficult process to do, but it's a great skill to have, because even if they don't ask you to do it, if you're able to do it, makes your essay way stronger, and it impresses profs all the time.
It sure does. It's probably one of like the favorites, one of those like, oh my gosh, excellent job, and ways to get an A. And then on top of that, layer multiple scholars. Like if you're putting 2 or 3 scholars in conversation, like layering that out in that process you just described, 100%. I love that. Yes. So, and that's just also, just to point out, that is a specific strategy, right? That is very easily used in a bunch of different disciplines. Often a lot of students don't know about it, or they don't use it, or even if they're doing compare contrast, they won't use it in terms of putting scholars in conversation with each other. But that's really just a great example of critical thinking, right? And if you're able to do that and piece together an argument and analysis in such a nuanced and granular way, like your brain power is just on fire. And that spills over into way more important things, arguably, than even like a paper, right?
Definitely. I think the last thing maybe with reading would be primary documents, which is an interesting thing that you have to tackle too. That can be challenging because of the wording that they're using. I think the key with that is relating it to other readings you're doing. Normally they're not given on their own, but they're consolidating with a lecture or an additional reading, and that's a good strategy to understand exactly what they're arguing, because it's going to be in peculiar language at times, just because when it's written, they're older documents, but those are pretty, I think, easy to handle once you put them in context.
Yeah, and that's huge, and that just about like brings into play pretty much everything I think you've talked about up to this point. And especially with, I think the big takeaway of what I'm thinking, at least here, and you tell me if I'm off base, but the fact that reading, it's so much more than just literally consuming information off of a page.
For sure. it's putting analysis to that.
And that's what actual reading
Right.
is. I love it. Okay. So that's huge as far as, so for college, really the self-advocacy piece, using the resources, speaking to your TAs, especially when it comes to assignments, and being really unapologetic about it. I love that. And then, yeah, the reading comp, really figuring out what it means to genuinely engage with your readings and not just passively, consume information. That's huge. Is there anything else outside of those two buckets that you think are super important, or that you wish you would have known, or that contributed to your success? Joseph is off to grad school soon. He's
I would say those are the two biggest things. Maybe just even being able to interact with peers, because I think that's an interesting perspective and dynamic. And sometimes people will be very opinionated, whether it's in tutorial or in group projects. People have strong viewpoints, and being able to consolidate those into an effective assignment, you can run into some challenges sometimes where people are, they don't want to alter their perspectives on a topic.
Okay, interesting. So is this, from your end, would it be about having the willingness to kind of actively pursue other perspectives and engage in dialogue with people who have perspectives that don't align with yours?
Yes, because I think that's something I had to learn to do, and I didn't really think that would be an issue. Maybe it's a little bit more related to the discipline of international relations and people having certain viewpoints of the different isms, like, and the different international relations theories. But I think that can apply to other areas as well. Like, even I have a friend in English literature, and she said they were discussing something in a group setting, and somebody had a certain opinion on what the author was arguing and didn't agree with what the author was arguing and thought it was biased in a certain sense, and they had to consolidate that in their assignment. And
that's interesting. Okay, and that goes back again to that critical thinking piece. Can we take what other people are saying and process it in such a way that we can actually make sense of it and use it?
Right, and it relates to putting, I guess, scholars in perspective, except now it's yourself.
Yeah, 100% relative to your peers, absolutely. So, Joseph, that's so helpful. That's so insightful. And then I think a big final question for you is, what would you say the role of support played for you, kind of throughout, finishing high school into college? A lot of students, they don't want help. They don't want to hear it. They may be afraid of it. It makes them stupid. They can do it on their own. And especially even a lot of students getting good grades, but, kind of killing themselves in the process, but they don't want help. Can you just speak a bit to what did that, what was the help at the end of the day? What did it do for you?
It was huge. I know I wouldn't have attained the success I have in university without the assistance of Commonwealth Consulting. And it's just, even there's a lot of bright people at university, and you have to, I think, give yourself an advantage. And even if you think you're a smart individual, there's always ways to improve as a scholar, whether it's in your writing, your deep analytical thinking. And it's just, even it can become overwhelming when you're at university. So it's even about planning deadlines and knowing, like we said, outlines are so important. So you can't write a paper right before. You gotta, if you go through it and if you get that feedback on an outline, there's time to improve. It's just so huge to have somebody there who's able to make you think deeper, because when we get feedback, obviously, on edits or anything, it's okay, we understand this, but Joseph, what does this really mean? Or how can we make this clearer, explain this in more concise terms? And that's a critical component of finding any success.
That's awesome. That's so great to hear. And it sounds like it's challenging you to be the better version of yourself. It's like, how much smarter can you feel or get? How much deeper can you challenge yourself to go?
Exactly. Yeah. You can be a good writer, but there's always, or a good student, there's always room to improve, to become great. And I think that's difficult to do on your own, because everybody's going to think that the product they're producing is great, and it probably will be, but you always need that assistance, and it's better to get that assistance before you hand it in than have a TA or prof tell you that they're not mistakes, but that you're not at an A or an A- level.
Yeah, I love that. I want to highlight that. So if I'm understanding right, it's really helping for you to understand your performance relative to your potential and kind of like bridging that gap.
Exactly, because if obviously you can produce better work, but you need that assistance. At 18, 19, as a young student, you don't know everything that profs are looking for, or you don't know what great writing is until you develop those skills. And it's just, I don't, you can learn different, even outside of academics, you can learn different skills, but you always need assistance to hone in on it, to be the better version of yourself. Like, I'll give an example of an athlete. Like, they can be maybe a great swimmer, but champion Olympians have support, have people who are helping them with their strokes, with their endurance, and it's no different being a student. You need a coach, and you need somebody who's gonna not motivate you because you're motivated on yourself, but somebody who's gonna push you to your limits to be the best version of yourself, like you said.
Yeah, that's awesome, which you have stepped into over the years. I'm cognizant of our time, and I know that we'll have to wrap up here soon, but yeah, I mean, Joseph, the way that you've grown over the last few years has been such a privilege to watch. And the fact that now, can you share with everyone a little brag time, but what's coming up for you, where you've applied to, and where you're hoping to go? Actually, sorry, the degree you're going to graduate with, and then next steps on the horizon.
So I'll be graduating with honors Bachelor of Arts from U of T in International Relations. So different history, political science, and economics that I've studied. And now I've applied to a host of graduate programs, a few law schools, and a lot of different international relations programs, whether it's the Monk, which is out of U of T, Master of Global Affairs or Public Policy, the Balsillie School, which is an international affairs school in Waterloo, and programs at Carleton or U Ottawa. So we've applied now and just waiting to hear back.
Waiting game, and I think we'll be celebrating in the coming weeks. But yeah, that's so promising and terrific. And I guess let me just kind of zoom out and ask last question. You know, a lot of the parents and students that we're working with, they are struggling. There are a lot of stresses. School is really hard. Writing is hard. They might think that they're bad at subjects. Like, there's a lot of, you know, these challenges that we've touched on today and you shared your own. What would you say to them? Like, do you have kind of a key takeaway or just one thing based on your experience, having gone through your own challenges, come out on the other side? What's like one or two takeaways?
I think, first of all, ask and seeking the help. You said a lot of people sometimes might be hesitant. Definitely seek the help, and then go into it with an open mind. I think that you want to get better, because I know it's difficult sometimes when somebody critiques your writing or critiques what you're doing, and you feel like, oh, that my prof or my teacher is critiquing me, and now I have a support system who's also critiquing me. But understand it's a process, and eventually you'll be confident enough to do it on your own, where there's just a quick review at the end, almost, that yes, okay, and remember these couple qualities that you've forgotten from this paper or this assignment. So it's a process, but go into it knowing that you'll become a better student and even a better person, I think, on the other side.
Yeah, a better person. I love that. In any ways in particular?
Ability to, I guess, deal with constructive criticism. That's a life skill going forward for anything you do. And I think just working in collaboration, it's just a skill set that's important to have, and you're just more confident even producing a product or even engaging with like peers and scholars. Like, I never used to really talk about international relations outside because it seemed like a lot of people knew more about it than I did. But now, because I can read an article or a paper and understand what's being argued there, I'll have those conversations with other students or anybody I come into contact with.
Which is awesome. And the hallmark of true learning, not just for the school purpose, but like you said, for you as a thinker, and you're curious. And that's, wow, Joseph, that's so wonderful. I can't thank you enough for hopping on with us today, with me today, and then all of you who's eventually watching this. Thank you so much. And you guys, Joseph's story is, you know, rife with its own unique challenges and how he overcame them. Some of the strategies, especially Joseph, that you shared, those are amazing. I'm going to have to highlight those like in writing and get the actual timestamp, because that will be of immense value to a lot of our students I know who probably have never even, you know, heard of some of the things that you shared. And anyone else, if you guys, you're struggling, you're feeling stressed, if you're a student watching this, it can get better. School doesn't have to be so hard. If you're a parent watching this, same thing. Your kids, you know, a healthy amount of stress and struggle. And Joseph, I bet you would agree with this. That's normal and to be expected and fine. But overall, there are strategies and systems in place that can really streamline school and make learning enjoyable and build the skills. Truly, it's not just rhetoric of like, yeah, succeeding in the classroom, but truly learning how to thrive in life. So if that is you, I'm going to drop a link to book a call, and we can hop on and see how we can make all of this work for you in your day-to-day. And that is it for today. Joseph, thank you so much again. Really appreciate it. And
thanks for having me.
I know we'll be talking in the next couple of weeks about your admissions, but yeah. All right, you guys, that's it for today. See you on the next video. Bye.